Hello, everyone. Thank you for your patience and welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. My name is Echo Sutterfield, and I'm a project manager here at Advocates for Children of New Jersey. If you're new or unfamiliar with us, ACNJ is the largest nonprofit, multi-issue child advocacy agency in New Jersey, and that is a mouthful, but we believe in advocating for the holistic well-being of our children. Our goal is to ensure that every child is afforded the opportunity to grow up safe, healthy, and well educated. And that's why we created these lunch and learn sessions as a space to talk about the areas and issues that are affecting New Jersey children and families. Today's session is on environmental justice, and we are so excited to introduce Kandyce Perry, who is the Director of the Office of Environmental Justice. Kandyce leads statewide efforts to make sure environmental justice is part of how we shape policy, protect communities, and make decisions that impact our health and environment. Please, everyone, join me in welcoming Kandyce Perry.
Right. Thanks, Echo. And thanks for the opportunity to be here with ACNJ. I love every opportunity that I have to talk about environmental justice, especially with groups like this who have, in my mind, such a clear nexus into this topic, advocating for the health of New Jersey's children. Environmental justice impacts children in all sorts of ways that we'll get to today in today's discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a lot of information to share with you all and to get through. So I'm going to try my best to talk a little bit faster so we can have enough time for questions at the end. So just a disclaimer that it might feel like a lot of information all at once, a little bit intentionally, because I just want to give it all to you. I'll leave the slides with you so you can go back and peruse through at your leisure. But let's just dive right in. So. All right, so we're looking good, Echo? Okay, great. So excited to be here. We're going to talk about EJ and what it is and what you can do and what the DEP is doing. But first, let me just start with some background. I like to do my presentation this way to kind of like, how did we get here? So if we are understanding that EJ, and I'll get through get to some official definitions, but if we're just knowing as a baseline, right, that some communities experience more than their fair share of pollution. Like, why is that the case? Like, why? Who did it? How did we get here? Well, the answer is systemic racism, but we'll go a little bit further. But just history, right? So as we rise to be this industrial and technological powerhouse of the United States as we are today, if you just think back through history of like where we've been and how some of the wars that we were participating in kind of caused us to produce and produce and produce and to manufacture and to build industry, right? With all of that comes industry popping up all over the place. We have pollution that's being generated for the first time. We have water bodies and rivers that are on fire. We have air that is literally orange, right? And so as a response to that, you have a rise and the development of the EPA, of the NJDEP, of other state environmental agencies. You have the Clean Air Act, you have the Clean Water Act. You know, there's prevalence and an emphasis on protecting our natural resources, protecting our earth, cleaning up pollution, making sure that our species don't become more endangered, all of that, right? So we've had a lot of accomplishments environmentally since, you know, World War I, let's say, up until 1970, and even up in today. You know, we are recycling way more. So there's a lot to be celebrated, right? And there's a lot more work to do. We know that. But today's story is about, you know, like as we develop all of those laws and policies that are supposed to protect us, that are supposed to protect our natural resources and protect our environment, protect our air quality. What happened to making sure that when industry and when manufacturing was being cited, that it was being cited properly? Like, was anybody thinking about that when they wrote the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act? Is like, we probably shouldn't put a multiplicity of these polluting facilities in one neighborhood as opposed to another, right? Like, so who was thinking about that? And the answer is, unfortunately, there wasn't that foresight in that provision. Hindsight is 22. More nefariously, you have bad actors out there. You have people who um, hate and discriminate on the basis of race and income. And we'll get into some of those factors, but it's just to say that as we're ramping up, as we're developing, as we're making society better collectively and broadly, we're not thinking about those pockets where maybe society and like your everyday quality of life is being made worse, right? So let me go a little bit deeper and explain to you what I mean by all this in detail. So environmental law since 1970. So if we think about the Clean Air Act as an example, the Clean Air Act set by the federal government, by our Congress, gives authority to the states to carry out and implement the Clean Air Program. So the DEP will issue what we call a permit. So this is a document that authorizes a facility or a company, a developer, to go and build, to go and construct, to do some type of operation. So you need permission from the state via the authority given to us by the Clean Air Act to go and do that thing, right? So if we think about the example of a power plant, usually, at least in the air context, that permit is just going to give permission for just the 1 point of air emission. So if we think about that smokestack, it's going to tell you what are the minimum or the maximum, let's say, limitations for how much pollution you can emit into the air. But if you're within that threshold, then you can go ahead and get your permit. What the Clean Air Act doesn't give us the authority to do, at least before New Jersey, I'm going to tell you about the flip of this, is it doesn't look at any of the other multiplicity or cumulative sources of pollution that are related to the power plant. It's only going to look at that smokestack. But what about all the diesel trucks that go back and forth in and through communities? What about the pollution and the air pollution from those trucks as well, right? So it's not taking into account, nor is it taking into account factory A plus factory B plus C, D, E, all the way to Z that may already be permitted to operate within that community and the multiplicity of pollution from all of those smokestacks. So as the DEP, we're not saying, oh, you're underneath the maximum threshold for how much pollution you can emit. But because there's 3 other similar facilities next door, we're not going to allow you to operate because there's already too much pollution in the air. The Clean Air Act does not give authority to do that. So what ends up happening is you have these overburdened places with all of these pollution generating facilities that cause cardiovascular disease and cancer and asthma and all of the bad things that we hear about. Until 2020, until our legislature within New Jersey passed the environmental justice law. So let me explain the fundamental paradigm shift that the EJ law does since 2020. So the EJ law requires the DEP to take into consideration when we are authorizing and granting permits, not only the smokestack at the power plant, but also the diesel trucks that might go to and through. If you think of like a recycling plant, they're bringing materials through the community to the facility, and all of the other environmental stressors that cause pollution that might already be in the community. In addition with, like I said, all of those other sources, right? So the law requires us that when we do our EJ process, when we're doing our review, to take a look at all of those sources of pollution and to generate a decision document with specific conditions. So we're going to condition your permit with environmental justice actions that the facility is required to take. All of that is going to be within a decision document, and those conditions then live with your air permit, your solid waste permit, your stormwater permit, whatever authorizations you need as a result of your constructing and operating from the DEP. We're going to make sure that we do this review process to implement EJ into that, so that when you get so that in order to get your permit, you have to be doing EJ through that process. So I'll break that down in a little bit, but I'm first reminded to just take a step back and talk more about environmental justice. What exactly is it? So it's the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of who they are, race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to how we are developing, implementing, and enforcing environmental laws, regulations, or policy. And another way to look at this is that no group of people, especially due to the color of their skin, should bear a disproportionate share of negative environmental consequences. Everyone is entitled to equal enforcement of environmental protection, not just those who are able to financially move away from an environmental threat. So one of the narratives you might hear is like, if you're living in a community with all these sources of pollution, why don't they just leave? The pollution has to go somewhere, right? And the point is that everyone is not able to leave, nor do they want to, nor should they have to. So in those contexts where people aren't able to move, there is a responsibility for those in power to make sure that we are enforcing our laws equally so that people, regardless if you're in that situation or not, have clean air, have clean water, have a right to a healthy environment. So there are some environmental justice principles that the most impacted groups speak for themselves. That it's not just about disparities, but it's also about creating access to environmental benefits. We're talking open space and tree canopy and green stormwater infrastructure. So not just about the harms, but what about the benefits? There's a racial gap between who causes and who experiences environmental pollution. And environmental racism didn't just happen overnight, it's systemic. So when we think about the origins of the EJ movement, as the Clean Air Act and the EPA and the DEPs across the states are rising up in creation, we also have an attention is being paid to the disproportionate levels of pollution on communities of color. They're organizing movements, they're organizing sit-ins, and they eventually make their way in 1991 to a People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit where 17 principles of environmental justice are drafted. I don't have time to go through them, but I'll leave the link with you. Just good principles to keep in mind as you're thinking about how you can incorporate environmental justice and those principles into your work. So a little bit more in terminology when we talk about environmental racism versus environmental injustice. So every environmental injustice is environmental racism, but not every injustice is based on race. So you can have some injustices that are based on income, for example, some that are based on race. Um, more of you'll see through data, there are multiple sources that race is usually the number one indicator of whether or not an injustice is being played out. So given that reality, that we can look often at injustice through the lens of race, I want to just talk about and unpack and kind of understand environmental racism. This is going to be a grossly um, summarized version of our history. But if we just kind of think about the origins of this country, that this land was colonized and stolen from our indigenous brothers and sisters, that the natural resources that they rely on for their ways of living culturally and religiously, of hunting and fishing and gathering and foraging, have been ruined through conquest, through pillaging, and those natural resources that they depend on that pillaging of those natural resources in the name of conquest and colonialism is an example of an environmental racism that we can see that impacts our tribal and indigenous populations still to this day in New Jersey. We have tribal populations that are living on Superfund sites where their members of their community are dying every single day from cancer. Not an exaggeration. We see that in New Jersey and all across the country, unfortunately. You know, when we think of slavery, when we think of the forced labor of Black bodies being stolen from Africa, forced to build the foundations of this country, and the connections between those descendants of those enslaved people, the descendants of those people today, and the incidences of health outcomes caused by environmental decisions. That connection there is also has roots from environmental racism. We can think about redlining. Some of you may be familiar with this concept of immigrant and minority communities not having access to financial services and financial products, you know, not being able to get loans to have a home or even a bank account. How could one think about upward mobility and, you know, relocating to communities that are free from pollution to give someone a better shot at life, not only for themselves, but also generationally? When you aren't able to have a bank account, when you aren't able to get a home loan, and these communities were deemed undesirable for development. And so you have literal maps of red line communities where you have this signal to facilitate or to industry of where to locate. The thought is that in these communities, there will be less pushback, there will be less enforcement of regulations. And so you have over time kind of this co-location of all of this pollution in historically redlined communities. And those communities are also the ones that have less investment. So there's less tree canopy and so on. And so just a few examples for you there. I have a map of redlining in Camden for you. Okay, so let's shift from talking about how we got here to where we're headed, at least for the DEP. And so we have two pieces of policy that really direct our action on environmental justice. One is an executive order that the governor signed, and that really directs all executive branch departments and agencies to focus on environmental justice and think about ways for how to incorporate it into our missions as an agency. And the next is our environmental justice law that was signed in 2020. So I referenced this before. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into it. So if you Googled the EJ law and you pulled up the first page, it will give these declarations from the legislature. And it really talks about, in such a really powerful way, about how New Jersey's communities have been subject to disproportionately high numbers of pollution, and the legacy of citing all this pollution in those overburdened communities. It poses a health-based risk. It limits economic success, and that it's past time for the state to correct these historical injustices. That overburdened communities should have a meaningful opportunity to participate in decisions, because that's also historically been the case, is that there's not only a cumulative impact from a biological stance of how all this pollution is carried out in the body, but also overburdened communities are limited from even having a say about where pollution is being cited and how it's being carried out. So we owe those communities transparency and honesty and an opportunity to engage in those decisions, right? And it's in the state's interest to limit the future placement of and expansion of facilities in these communities. So how do we do that through the law? The first thing to understanding the law is determining applicability. So there's three criteria that determine if the law is triggered. One is if the facility is located within an overburdened community. Two is if the facility is defined as one of these 8 categories as defined by the law. So we're talking about major sources of air pollution. You can think of that like a power plant, incinerators, sewage treatment plants, transfer stations, scrap metal facilities, landfills, those sorts of pollution generating facilities. And third, if the facility is located within an overburdened community and then is also requesting a specific type of permit or authorization document from the DEP, like a land use permit, a water permit, an air permit, like that. So what is an OBC? It is a community defined at the block group level. So you'll have a block group, you'll have a tract you'll have a zip code, a municipality, a county, a state, a country. So that lowest level of geographic unit that the census collects data for, a block group, where at least 35% of households are qualified as low income, or 40% are minority, or a member of a state recognized tribal community, or 40% don't speak English that well. So the emphasis is on the word or. You need not meet all three to be an OBC, just one counts. And so we have a map here. Out of our state's 564 municipality, I believe, and the numbers have just changed, but around 330 of those municipalities have overburdened block groups within their municipal boundaries. So the difference between an OBC and an EJ community, are they the same? So the answer is no. And I have this Venn diagram for you to explain the difference. So if you think of your OBC as your circle in blue, or your community of concern, so those communities are defined just based on demographics. And then you layer on top the extent to which those communities, based on their demographics, suffer from disproportionate environmental and public health stressors. So we're just talking about pollution there, air pollution, water pollution, for example, and or layering on top the absence of environmental benefits. We talked about that earlier. So quality parks, tree canopy, green stormwater infrastructure, those environmental benefits. If you layer those on top of your overburdened community, that is what constitutes an environmental justice community. So where can we see our overburdened and environmental justice communities? Well, we have a tool called EJ Map. If you Google New Jersey EJ Map, it'll pop right up. And in this tool, you're able to see your overburdened communities on this map. So that tealish color is your OBCs. That golden marigoldish color is your adjacent to OBC. So these are zero population block groups we're also keeping track of that are immediately adjacent to an OBC. Think of like a port. No one lives at the port, so it has zero population, right? But the port has pollution generating facilities. So just kind of mapping out those adjacent block groups as well. You're able to see, this is zoomed in on Trenton, you're able to see the individual kind of combinations, whether you are limited English and income and minority, or the combination of those three outlined here. Then you're able to see where all of those facilities, so those 8 types, power plants, recycling centers, landfills, you can search in your address and see where all of those facilities are related to where you live, where you go to school, where you go to work. And so that's really interesting to see. You're able to click on, these are just screenshots, but if you were live on the map, you're able to click on each facility. You'll get a pop-up with a lot of information. You can see permit history, you can see violation history. And then this is the meat of the tool and the stressor summary tab. So here you're able to see which overburdened communities are experiencing more than their fair share of pollution, meaning which ones are more disproportionate as compared to their non-overburdened counterparts. So those ones in the darker blue are going to be your environmental justice communities. If you zoomed in and just clicked on one of those block groups outlined in this turquoise color, you'll get a pop-up. If you click on that pop-up and expand it, you'll get this link to a data table that you can pull up. And so for each of our, I think there's like 3,000 or so overburdened block groups within the state, you can pull up a specific and customized data table for each one. And here you can get so much good information about these 26 environmental and public health stressors. So these are the data sources that we use to determine which block groups are overburdened disproportionately by pollution. So we're looking at ozone, we're looking at particulate matter. That's that really fine granular, you know, you can think of it like smog and smut, like that, those particulates that are in the air that turn it a different color. That's particulate matter. We're looking at traffic, we're looking at density, we're looking at contaminated sites like brownfields. And then we're also looking at stressors that may cause public health issues, like drinking water quality, you know, the potential lead exposure. So we're looking at the age of housing stock. We know that houses built before a certain year have a higher likelihood of having lead in the paint. We're looking at lack of tree canopy, how much impervious surface, so concrete and asphalt, where there isn't an opportunity to have green space and tree canopy. So those are our environmental and public health stressors, 26 of them. So if I go back a bit, I don't have time to kind of go through and explain the math behind how this works, but we do have a tutorial online where I do that. You're able to kind of understand for each stressor what the block group's value is as compared to their non-overburdened counterpart. So in order to determine disproportionality, that's a comparative term, right? So you need to compare the block group in question that you think may be overburdened by pollution as compared to some point of comparison that's not experiencing as much pollution. So we have values compared to the county, values compared to the state, and we're able to assess disproportionality for each of these stressors that way. So really, really interesting if you want to dive deeper and kind of geek out on the data. All right, moving on. So I talked about determining applicability, right? The next step in our process is we require for facilities that trigger the law to do two things. One is to prepare an environmental justice impact statement. So you may have heard of like a health impact statement. There are various impact statements in the environmental context, especially. But this one, an environmental justice impact statement, is going to ask the facility to prepare and articulate for the public by proposing to construct or to move into this community, what are the existing environmental and public health stressors that the community already faces? What are the stressors that by moving in or constructing that your facility would contribute to that baseline level of pollution? And then what could you do to minimize and avoid those contributions to pollution? So that's what the impact statement is. We then require the facility to do meaningful public participation. So the way that it typically worked is an applicant, a facility would come to the DEP, they would request a permit, they would sit down with the DEP and kind of talk it out, what kind of documentation would be needed. They'd submit their application, we'd review their application, and at some point we'd approve it and have a public hearing for the community after there's already a draft permit. So the applicant and the DEP are in communication talking about the proposed project, but where is the community? At this point, they're on the outskirts of those conversations. So the fundamental flip that the environmental justice law says is that even before we get to drafting a permit, we're going to require the impact statement and require the facility to have a public hearing with the overburdened community in question and present the impact statement to the community, allowing the community an opportunity to comment, to ask questions, and requiring the facility to respond to every single comment and question. All of that information from the public hearing, the testimony, the comments will be considered by the department before we draft the permit. So that environmental justice discussion is so important to have with the community, and we will consider that conversation and the outcome of it as we make our decision. So this is the last step in the process where we assess, can the facility avoid causing a disproportionate impact? So that's our goal. We don't want more pollution in communities that are already overburdened. So the thing to do is that if a facility can avoid causing a disproportionate impact, and again, we're going to assess that by reading the environmental justice impact statement, reading the response to comments from the facility, and reading what the community has to say in terms of insight and feedback. If we determine they can avoid causing disproportionate impact, then we'll authorize the facility to proceed. So these are for facilities that can do that. For facilities that cannot avoid causing a disproportionate impact, we actually don't have the authority to shut down already existing facilities. But for new facilities, if they can't avoid causing disproportionate impact, we are required to not authorize their permit, right? And so for already existing facilities, so these are facilities that are just requesting a permit to expand their operations, they need to modify their operations in some way, we will set conditions. And I talked about that earlier. So these are specific measures and actions that will be inserted within the permit that in order to get authorization to proceed, we're going, like as a condition of your authorization to proceed, you have to do 1, 2, and 3 actions, right? So examples of what those conditions could be is that you need to install control technology that will control and limit and reduce the amount of emissions that you emit. So there's various technologies like a bag house, if you're familiar with that. It's kind of like a vacuum that will suck out the air pollution from the operations so that it doesn't get emitted into an air. So we can require them to add the best available technology. We can also require things like a noise control plan, a dust control plan, recirculating your truck traffic to go around the community and not directly through the community, things like that, that will over time reduce pollution as these facilities are coming in for permits. So I just said a lot. There's a lot of information that we have online. I've left links for you. So transitioning a bit to my office and letting you know the role that we specifically play. We work with our counterparts within the agency to help implement and execute the environmental justice law and rule. But my staff here that I'm so grateful for, we also carry our work out in kind of 3 priorities. So the first is amending DEP's internal work so that we can make environmental justice and doing environmental justice just a regular part and practice of our mission. It shouldn't feel like an add-on thing. It should just feel like the way that we do business. The way that we think about serving New Jerseyans is through an environmental justice lens. So the way that we're doing that is through environmental justice assessment work and action planning. The second is facilitating a council of all of our state agencies to have them also think about incorporating EJ into what they do. So as the DEP, environment is baked into our name. So it's obvious that we would be doing environmental justice as the environmental regulatory agency. But other departments and agencies also have a role to play in environmental justice, such as the Department of Transportation, Department of Education, Department of Health, and so on. So we work with those agencies to also think through and talk about EJ. And then the last is really sitting with our overburdened communities, listening to them, talking to them, building relationships, and breaking down barriers so that they can participate in this governmental process. We understand that government is often the enemy. We understand that communities don't often trust government. So we have to put ourselves out there and let people know that we are human, that we are accessible, that we are honest, and that we can do better than what we have historically done. So to that end, I want to tell you about an environmental justice tour that we've gone on the last couple of years. We have been to just about every county in the state, having these open town hall meetings where we're asking people about their life, their lived experience, and incorporating that feedback so that we can better tailor and address the work that we do so that we're not perpetuating injustices. So this is just a map of everywhere that we've been in the last couple of years. They've been great conversations. And just some cool pictures for you of some of those engagement sessions that we have. We've been able to take tours with community activists. They kind of have led us around those communities so we can get a better sense of that community context on the ground. So really grateful for all that we've been, myself, my staff, and our commissioner, who is our chief executive of the agency. And also we are led by our state's Environmental Justice Advisory Council. So this is a group of 18 members all across the state who represent various sectors and various geographic areas to advise us on ways that we can incorporate EJ into everything that we do. And so really grateful for their expertise. There's white papers, there's recommendations, just really having that insight from people on the ground about their lived experiences is so important so that we can break down those barriers and get people to kind of understand this government system a little bit better and not be intimidated by it. So just a couple of slides left. I am going to kind of shift now into how you can get involved. how you can think through environmental justice, maybe in your own context of ACNJ, and just give you some resources that I hope will be helpful. So the first thing that I would offer is to identify environmental injustices in your community. And so you can do this by exploring EJMAP. We just went through EJMAP, kind of understanding at the block group level where those overburdened pockets are based on demographics and based on those 26 environmental and public health stressors, kind of playing around with that tool and understanding like, oh, there's a lot of impervious cover here, or this community really struggles with a high incidence of old housing stock. So there may be some lead issues in this community. Kind of understanding what those injustices are will really help. So you can do that through EJMAP. You can also do that through a tool called Healthy Community Planning NJ. So if you Google that or HCPNJ, it'll pop right up. This is a tool in collaboration with the DEP and the Department of Health. And so I just have a screenshot for you. When you get to the website, you'll see this map. You can click on your county, and then in each county, you'll see all of the municipalities. There's a summary report, or you can click on the full report. I have a screenshot of Hamilton and Mercer County, just a summary report. You have all of this really good data here that shows demographics, it shows environmental indicators, it has public health indicators like low birth weight, childhood blood lead, asthma, stroke, obesity. So if you're interested in those public health indicators specifically for your municipality, and then also how those indicators shape up for your town as compared to the county and as compared to the entire state. That's what that blue, yellow, and green column does. So there's a whole report specifically customized for each municipality within our state. Just a good resource to have that extra data. So let me go back to my list here. So number 2 is to get trained. One of the things that my office, that my staff has been leading is a series of seminars to learn the foundations of environmental topics and the foundations of state government and the DEP. So like I said, I totally understand that state government in general, is two things. It's both undertaught, we don't have a good ethic within this country of teaching civics as a true principle for our youth in particular, and as you mature in life, just don't have that as a principle, maybe as much as we should. So the foundations of like how government is even structured, how all of our departments even function, what is our jurisdiction and what is not our jurisdiction, kind of understanding those basics so that you can be your best self as an advocate. And so I think I have a slide here so we've been engaging in what we call Navigating the DEP System, a series of environmental seminars specifically for overburdened communities, where we teach people about environmental planning, about the regulatory process, about state funding. We have one on enforcement that's not shown in this screenshot, and we'll have some more trainings. All of this is posted online. Definitely encourage you to kind of maybe watch some of the past recordings so that people can understand all that we do at the DEP. It's a complicated system to unpack, but we hope that this seminar series is an attempt at doing that. I have a highlight from one of our sessions on understanding the regulatory process, where just a slide that I wanted to pull out about crafting actionable comments. So one of the things that I hear from my peers within the agency is like, oh, we took so much time to like draft this meaningful thing. And we invited the public to come and hear about it and to comment on it. And people they either don't show up, or if they do show up, their comments are either off topic or not helpful. And so my response to that is like, well, what did you do to get the word out? That could be a whole other webinar on like communications, meaningful communications, that we don't have time for today. But secondly, are you equipping people with enough information about how they could help the DEP? right? So I just have this slide here that kind of gives some thoughts about how you can comment and how you can craft actionable comments that really put the DEP in a position to act, to move, to incorporate that insight meaningfully. Okay, so back to my list. So the next thing you can do is to join our environmental justice directory. So really proud that we've launched this maybe a few months ago. This is a directory where you can click on this button here, it says become a member, fill out just a short survey, and you can be added to this list of environmental justice advocates all across the state. And so we think that this is a helpful tool because people always reach out to my office and say, hey, do you have contacts in this community or that community? Or I need to engage EJ communities on this topic, but I just don't know who to reach out to, right? That day-old question, like, how do I get the word out? I don't know who to reach out to. So we have, with consent, listed all of our contacts and made it public so that anyone can come here and say, I'm looking specifically for this type of person to invite to this specific meeting. There's ways to filter this directory based on demographics, based on your geographic location, and so on. So just encourage people who are interested in maybe being a connector. If you are good about receiving information and distributing it to your network, to your neighbors, to your family and friends, so that they can get notice about an opportunity, about a grant, about a public meeting that they can attend. If you are good at being a connector, I encourage you to fill out the form and become a member of our EJ directory. Back to my list. So the fourth one is just exactly what I said. It's about spreading the word, making sure that as you receive good information, that it's just not stopping, that it's not just living and stopping with you, that you act as that connector, you act as that champion, you act as that ambassador to spread the information and the knowledge that you have to people who may not have it, but who may be really affected by it. So in your context, it may be teachers, it may be parents. Really glad that you all are gathering here today. And now you're in a position to be better equipped to share it with others. And so the next one is attending public meetings. There are so many opportunities in state government and also local government to let your voices be heard. And in those gaps where maybe there isn't an opportunity to voice your concern, I think the more and more you work that muscle of showing up, you're able to demand where you need to be in the room or where a table needs to be set for you and for your residents and your community members and your audience when maybe there isn't one. So I would like to see more residents attending and engaging with government officials on all sorts of topics. And when you see that you're not like that you don't have a voice, to demand one, because that is your right as we live in a democratic country. So attending public meetings, I have the URL for you there. We have a list of all of those public hearings that are required for facilities that are subject to the environmental justice law and regulations to conduct. We have a whole schedule of when those meetings are happening. Soon, we'll have a way for you to sign up for automated notifications via email or text where you can get a direct notice about an upcoming meeting. So that's there for you. The more that you engage and attend, you really can shift and move the needle and not just let decisions happen in the background or in a vacuum without your input. So reviewing all the documents and submitting actionable comments, really practicing that as a skill set is really important. And lastly, connecting with my office. We have a lot of resources and we have a newsletter that comes out every other week with many opportunities for you. So with that, I will end, I believe, there we go, and leave a little bit time. I hope to have left more, but a little bit of time if people have questions. Thank you.